I'm Billy S, welcome back to the channel. Today we're taking a look at my top 10 Elden Ring areas. If you're looking for some of the smaller, lesser known locations of the game, check out part 1, where I went over areas 22nd through 11th. It's definitely worth your time. I'll even give you a minute. And for everyone still here, let's get to it. My top 10 areas in Elden Ring, ranked. And be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments below. Starting off today's top 10, we're journeying beneath the streets of the royal capital, taking a ladder down to the sewers as we explore the subterranean shunning grounds. Sewer levels are generally quite divisive, and this area is certainly no exception to that rule. Either you're going to love the twisting, turning exploration that comes with journeying through dangerous pipes, through sewers filled with rats, climbing atop dangerous platforms with imps looking to cut you down, and of course, there's a few basilisks for good measure. Or you're going to despise every second of the shunning grounds because you got lost in a pipe and have no idea where progression is. And why are there so many omens in close proximity to each other when it takes all my equipment to just kill one of them? And why do I have to run through a giant hall filled with Miranda flowers and giant hands just to reach the Dung Eater? For me, I fall on the former outlook. As a fan of the depths in Dark Souls 1, I've always enjoyed maze-like navigation where I have to rely on my sense of direction as I explore. Going through the pipes near the end of the area and trying to figure out where I need to go is part of the fun for me. I still have nightmares about accidentally dropping through a hole in one of the pipes and landing in this dark sewage room, only to be jump-scared by a revenant, the first I'd personally encountered in the game on my original playthrough. Fear is a great motivator. I love that there's even a hidden catacomb down here where you can fight Budget Pyramid Head after running from the entrance from the dreaded sewer lobsters. There's also just the fun of exploring an area that wraps around on itself, so you're constantly re-entering new rooms from different angles, or finding shortcuts that take you back to your singular grace. The enemy variety and placement does leave a lot to be desired. As said, there are just too many omens in the opening hall for it to feel fair, and the imps in the pipe platforming room are still not fun to fight, worst enemy type in the game whenever they appear. But hopping into pipes and exploring every nook and cranny for extra goodies and items is a lot of fun, ending with a really impressive elevator ride into the large sewage reservoir of sorts before you take on Sewer Moog in a makeshift chapel. And once you beat Morgott, then you can take the secret path beyond, revealing the secrets of the Merchant clan as you carefully descend some tricky platforming to reach the Chamber of the Three Fingers, where if you strip down, you can absolutely become the scum of the earth. I chose to do this interaction after burning Melina at the forge so I wouldn't feel so bad, especially since I'd already got Miquella's needle and could just undo it at the Placiduous Axe arena. It was just a prank, Hayeta. Hayeta? Hayeta? Wakey wakey eggs and bakey. Next up on our list is the optional dungeon to the north of Liurnia, Cadia Manor. Accessible by removing the illusory wall of the King's Realm ruins and riding past E.G. up the hill, this dungeon is home to Ranni's questline, and should you wish to swear into her service, you'll have to take on the horrors of the manor first. Starting off with a magic rain of arrows that will attempt to hone in on your position as they fire from the manor's gates. The only way to avoid them being to ride torrent and swerve out of the way. And once you reach the manor, the true survival horror begins, because the entire lower portion of Cadia Manor is infested with spider hands. These horrifying creatures are both so fascinating and yet so terrifying at the same time. My fight or flight response is triggered anytime they approach. It doesn't help that they can be hidden under the ground, waiting for you to be lured into their traps so they can snatch you up and squeeze the life out of you. Luckily, they can be shield countered, and their posture is fairly low, so it's easy to stun them and finish them off. But it does make exploration slow going, as you don't want to accidentally aggro a whole host of the creepers and find yourself on death's door. The upper half of the lower manor takes the form of a series of bridges that connect to an elevator leading to the manor's peak. Here, spectral knights can appear to attack the player, and I find the ones that throw magic potions to be especially brutal, as those projectiles can eat a player's health bar if you're not careful. I like that throughout AuthorAdena though, if you're careful, you can find a ton of hidden areas by doing some tricky platforming, such as how you obtain the Sword of Night and Flame, or how right before the boss arena, you can drop down the cliffs to obtain some cracked pots. And there's even a hidden merchant Pidia if you drop down the cliffs near Celovus's Rise later on in the game. A lot of these extra paths I never actually found on my original playthrough, so it was fun to explore and see what was what. I also have to appreciate that with the run to the boss, you can either fight the Troll Knight on the stairs, or you can use a few sneaky ladders to skip around him without drawing aggro. Gives the player a lot of freedom on how they want to progress. Which leads to an awesome boss arena where you fight Royal Knight Loretta before being let loose into the open world to explore the Three Sisters. Cardia Manor doesn't quite have the size and scope of the main Legacy dungeons, but makes up for it by ensuring that every part of the manor's space was well used, and you'll very rarely find a part of the manor you can't reach. It's just good game design. If I could just take a few moments of your time, I'm trying to reach 10,000 subscribers by the end of 2023. I don't know if we can do it, but I'd love to try. Look at how many of my viewers aren't subscribed. Let's rectify that. Be sure to parry that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on my weekly content. Back to the video. Perhaps I'm cheating just a little bit here as we take a look at Nokron, Eternal City, the upper half of Shifra River. This area, unlike the lower portion of Shifra River, has a lot less to explore overall, which is why I'm comfortable considering it for this list and not as a region, as from the moment the meteor crashes into Limgrave, the game explains that you are explicitly entering Nokron through the impact site. Parkouring over slanted rooftops and through abandoned buildings is extremely cool, especially if you've explored the lower Shifra River already, as you're re-exploring now from an entirely new perspective. The brief portion of the city leading to the Mimic Tier is a nice bit of setup, allowing you to fight some new enemy types and do a little exploring so you can get used to the ruins around you, followed by the large bridge that takes you to the grounds of the Ancestral Followers. This brief portion of the level is one of my favorites, as it's a lot more self-contained than lower Shifra River, so finding the required sconces to fight the Regal Ancestor Spirit is much simpler. In fact, on my first playthrough, I ended up fighting the Regal Ancestor Spirit before the normal Ancestor Spirit, so that says everything, doesn't it? There's some good items to find, a brief bit of tricky platforming to pull off, and for people who enjoyed the Red Wolf of Radagon, he's back, and this time he's got friends, yay. But we're not here for all that, we're here for the Eternal City proper. It's fascinating how, unlike Noxtella, where you constantly have to ascend the city to find loot, in Nokron it's the opposite. You're descending, having to jump along the edges and sides of these ancient buildings to make any meaningful progress. We're introduced to the normal silver tier enemies, and honestly, they had more potential than what was done with them. I feel like when you can create an enemy who can have any appearance, go nuts with it. The only silver tier that really did anything crazy was the final one before the throne who turns into a troll knight. Why couldn't some of the other tiers have turned into other enemies you fought on your journey? Give the player some variety in that sense. The brief indoor cathedral was a lot of fun to explore. Just looking down and seeing your first silver sphere is eerie. You can also use a stone sword key to collect everybody's favorite, the Mimic Tier ashes, giving you a +1 that you can break out whenever you feel like. This all leads to a large street where you can see the throne of Nokron, and I always feel awe when I come here, because from lower Shifra River, there's no inclination that there's this much up here unless you look at the map and see these explorable areas. But viewing a giant corpse on a throne, it puts things into perspective. Do I wish we got a proper boss fight here protecting the Fingerslayer blade? Yes, you'd think the Greater Will would want to keep an item capable of slaying their two-finger envoys under strict lock and key, but I digress. Nokron gets the edge over both Noxtella and the areas below this list because it's not simply a city, it's a recontextualization of an area we've already explored, and for me is very reminiscent of how Dark Souls played around with verticality in its world, something Elden Ring is also really good at, what with your in-game goal being to get higher and higher in the lands between. Good stuff. Speaking of recontextualizing, the next area on our list is Mohgwyn Palace, the final part of Shiefra River and home of one of the two endgame shard bearers, the Lord of Blood. Viewable from the moment you arrive on the edges of Shiefra River, I immediately was drawn to the Parthenon-looking structure in the distance and thought, I want to go there. Little did I know that upon journeying through the consecrated snowfield, I would find my wish granted by a waygate surrounded by blood. Mohgwyn Palace is a tale of two halves, with the open world portion being this dangerous, foul, bloody swamp, a bog filled with tough enemies and dangerous hazards, while the actual palace is a linear slog where a majority of the enemies feel absolutely pointless to fight. It's clear the focus was put into the outer swamp, what with the various key spells and items you can find throughout, as well as the various invasions by the nameless White Mask. This guy was surprisingly tough, and I found myself slain more than once in my journey to collect all the important items. I'm not the biggest fan of the blood-soaked Albinaurics, as they basically replace the bone wheel skeletons of the Souls games with their blood spike rolling attack that can devastate your health. You have to kill them before they can get the attack off, but there's often so many of them aggroed onto you at once that that's gonna be a tough time. But even then, the difficulty feels fair. You're in a fucking blood bog, of course the enemies here are gonna be powerful. I especially love the phantom skeletons that appear as you ride Torrent towards the main palace. It feels so cinematic, ducking and weaving through the trees while hoping you don't get sniped somehow. But for all the excitement of the blood swamp, the actual dungeon itself is, for lack of a better term, pretty mid. It's mainly inhabited by blistered strays, husks that really don't go out of their way to attack you, aside from a couple who are programmed to go for a grab, as well as a couple of sanguine nobles. Fun to fight, but when you go inside the palace, it's pretty much a straight path towards the exit leading to your pre-Mohg grace, so why bother even fighting them? It feels like From Software ran out of time or ideas for the actual dungeon, and just thought, slap a dark cave and throw in some sanguine nobles who spawn at certain points. A part of me almost thinks it would be easier if they had just skipped the dungeon entirely and let you go straight to Mohg. Or they could have utilized more of the blood swamp on the path upwards, creating blood pools and geysers that you'd have to work around and climb to reach the top. I don't know, there are possibilities at play, but when I reach the awesome boss arena and after beating Mohg get that view of Shiefra River from afar, I forget all my worries. And while we're focusing on endgame optional areas, let's quickly knock out Elfale, Brace of the Halig Tree at number 6. The second half of Malenia's domain feels way more like an actual dungeon than Miquella's Halig Tree did, featuring an actual interesting level layout that has you descending through the temples of Elfale to eventually reach the inner tree. While a fairly linear area in terms of progression, as you're ultimately always pushing to go from one side of the brace to the other, the way in which you get there is entirely up to you. Do you take the normal path down the battlements, fighting soldiers as you go? Do you hop onto some nearby pillars and shimmy around to the other side to fight an Erd Tree avatar on the outer walls? Or perhaps you want to be crazy like me and just drop into the Lion's Den itself by going along the lower courtyard that is jam-packed with revenants. You can go through hidden rooms filled with Cleanrot Knights looking to infect you with the Scarlet Rot, and all of this leads to a tough blockade of enemies and one final putrid avatar blocking your path to the first major grace. The first third of Elfale is easily the best part of the level, so much fun to explore and re-explore for optional goodies. The second third of the area is a bit bland in comparison. There are 3 putrid Crystallians guarding a chest, of which I will just open the chest and let myself die, because I don't want to fight them legitimately. You then have to go through a river of scarlet rot, and if you look down, you can see Melania's boss arena. There's an optional ulcerated tree spirit to fight that you have to slay in order to continue Millicent's questline, but you're going to get rotted while fighting it, so it's going to be miserable. And Millicent's questline comes to a tragic end after seeing her waterfowl dance the competition, but then you're quickly rushed to the last portion of the Halig tree and you forget about it. And sadly, I'm also not the biggest fan of the bottom half of the dungeon. The gardens you can explore after climbing down the roots seem like a fun idea and concept, but in execution, they're so jam-packed with enemy types I don't want to fight. The section with so many Kindred of Rots? No thanks. I ran through this area grabbing items and running away. I didn't feel like doing it legitimately, which is a shame because I actually love the aesthetic. The fact that there's this genuinely nice looking garden at the pit of the Halig tree, one of the sources of rot in the lands between, is a nice juxtaposition. It may sound like I'm hating on most of Elfale, but I really think the first third of the dungeon is that strong that it carries it this high on my list. But let's be real, nothing can compete with the 5 main legacy dungeons in this game, come on now. The only question is what order will they come in on my list, so let's get started. Taking the number 5 spot, we have the Magical Academy of Raya Lucaria. Likely the second legacy dungeon that players will access, here you have to ascend your way to Renala's Grand Library to claim her Great Rune. Now, I just want to make it very clear how big the gap is between the top 5 of this list and the rest of it. I genuinely feel, and I mean this, all 5 remaining areas in this list are some of the best designed locations in any Soulsborne game. Raya Lucaria is so inspired as a magic-based dungeon, taking the concept of this magical academy that has been done to death in the media, and giving it a dark twist. The headmistress is mentally ill, and the academy is falling into disarray, and everyone is Welsh. The doors were locked, forcing the player to kill a glintstone dragon just to enter, and once inside were attacked by students, horrifying caged constructs, and a whole host of husks in the lower graveyard. One can't help but think they might be deceased ex-students of the academy, and everything up until the giant water wheel is so eerie and foreboding. It doesn't feel like this illustrious school you've heard about from Selen or Topes. It's not really until you reach the classrooms and you start to see some of the crazy shit that happened here that you realize, oh, this place was never okay. These people are all insane. From the locked classroom that contains a rather ominous amount of crystals, to the giant mass you can find at the very end of the optional rooftop pathways. And I love it so much. Now, Raya Lucaria just going to Renala is fun once you reach the courtyard and you have to fight the virgin abductors, avoid the giant rolling magic ball traps, and even dealing with Moongrum, or in my case dropping him down an elevator shaft. It's fun. But it wasn't until I discovered the optional rooftop area that my love for Raya Lucaria truly grew. The fact there's an entire massive portion of the level that many players won't even find is astounding to me. I never saw it on my first playthrough. I had to watch my boyfriend find the secret rooftops, and I was like, en serio? Joder. Do I think some of the enemies can be a bit much? Yes, those swooping flying fucks can decimate health bars with how aggressive and unpredictable their attacks are, and the mage on the large bridge nearby shoots some pretty high level spiral spells, but with careful perseverance you can make your way across the rooftops and maybe even find some hidden areas to the school. Just be sure to drop onto this chandelier and grab the extra Academy Glintstone key. I forgot to do that this time around and spent a good 10 minutes looping my way back from the start of Raya Lucaria to the rooftops because I didn't want to respawn any of the enemies. Professional gamer right here. Raya Lucaria only misses out on a higher placement because I just prefer the more open-ended natures of the other 4 legacy dungeons. Nothing can prepare you for the first time awakening to see crumbling Farum Azula ahead of you. Just the visuals alone of this gigantic tornado whirling around the center of this destroyed city, dragons flying through the skies. And this is after we burned down the Erd Tree. How impactful. Unless you're like me in my original playthrough and you went through the 4 Belfries teleporter and you got this area spoiled for you. I don't understand why they did that. You have to explore Farum Azula in a clockwise fashion, with the goal being to reach Malekith and claim the Rune of Destined Death so you can rebuild the Elden Ring. Of course, it's not a simple jaunt, what with the giant ancient dragons, the Godskin duo, various beastmen, a few Crucible Knights, and more blocking your path. What I think Crumbling Farum does best is using its verticality and space. There are so many little pockets of exploration throughout the dungeon you can go to, and very often they'll link back up to previous areas you've already explored, or will just be situated above those previous areas, giving you a different perspective. It's like what Nokron did really well, but better. Take, for example, the ruins you have to platform down to reach the Godskin duo. There are a ton of side paths, optional corridors, floating platforms, and multiple ways even to get into the boss fight. Then later in the level, behind the Stone Sword key door and up an elevator, you find an upper part of Farum leading to where you fight Alexander. And all of these ruins you're on right now are floating above the previous area you explored to get to the Godskin duo. This is what I mean by using verticality well. You feel like you're exploring entirely new zones, only to discover how close everything truly is. The amount of optional paths following the first Crucible Knight in the area with the stationary dragon that shocks the floor as you approach is mind-blowing. You can climb up to where the birds are hanging out and try killing them, or drop down to some secret ruins and an elevator leading up to a hidden Crucible Knight and a talisman. Drop off a ledge here and there's an armor set to collect. And further along, there's an optional path you can find that will literally take you to a hidden secret boss fight of epic proportions. You get rewarded for exploring the entirety of Farum Azula, and there's always something to find down every path. But not every bit of treasure is worth collecting. I can't say I have any desire to revisit the lower portion of Farum invested with worm faces, as an example. Deathblight is not fun, and those enemies needed to stay in that forest in Altus. I also find the Farum Azula dragons not to be worth fighting. There's one that appears on this arena-looking platform, but you don't get anything for killing it. My boyfriend and I both found out the hard way. I think fighting Lanciax, Fortisax, and Placidusax is enough for me, thank you. Also just want to shout out the incredibly difficult invasion against Recusant Banal. If you follow the Volcano Mana questline, this is actually quite a cool moment, as it's made clear one of us is going to kill the other in all of our interactions. He's all about finding the strongest Tarnished, creating a champion who can go against the Erd Tree, and before our final foes, we have one last battle to see who is the strongest Recusant. And he's hard, and can steal your health. I had to play pretty conservatively to handle him, and if you know me, you know I'm not a conservative. Ayo! Ending with a great rematch against a Draconic Tree Sentinel that really forced me to get good in my original playthrough. Only to enter the boss arena and be like, yo, that's the place from the loading screens! From the moment you step out into the lands between, you're directed both by your eyes and by White Mask Vare to seek out Stormvale Castle. The fortress atop Limgrave's highest cliff, impenetrable as it towers over the land below, this was the main legacy dungeon shown off all the pre-release marketing, and after playing the game multiple times, I totally see why. Stormvale Castle has purposefully been designed to include just about everything that makes a legacy dungeon feel special, from the size and scope to the sheer amount of pathways and detours you can take that allow each player to tackle Stormvale in whatever way they desire, to the enemy variety that puts you on your toes as you dodge through deadly Stormhawks that can wield explosives, Stormvale Knights that can wield the power of the winds, a grafted scion in the halls near the main courtyard, a chance for you to get some revenge on the same type of creature that bested you at the start of your journey, and so much more. Whether you choose to take on Stormveil head-on and go through the front gate and get gunned down, or head along the side cliffs until you clamber up into one of the main watchtowers, it's gonna be a good time. In my first playthrough, I went along the battlements, dropped down into Roger's chapel, and explored the main buildings from there until I reached the courtyard with all the ballista boys. In this playthrough though, I climbed up to the roof to get a talisman, and then proceeded to just go where the castle took me, somehow managing to end up behind the ballistas near the main castle gate, which then led me to the Divine Tower Bridge. I'd never gone through Stormveil like that before. Or how about towards the end of the level when you go through the room with the living jars? I always found it weird that you go from the previous Grace, up an elevator, through this room, and then there's just another Grace right there before Godric. It felt like there wasn't much between those two checkpoints, only to find out on this playthrough that there was an entire secret part of the castle I had never accessed, because apparently it required precise platforming. Of course I knew about Godwyn's corpse below Stormveil, I'd just never been there in-game myself, so discovering the pathways down to this ominous creature below the castle was mind-blowing. Or how about that one Crucible Knight on the cliff edges you can find? He got elevated, and I felt no shame, but I'd never found him or this elevator before. It just blows my mind that no matter how many times I revisit Stormveil, I'm in for a different experience, all culminating in one of the best early game boss fights in an epic arena leading to the throne room. Stormveil, in the grand scheme of things, isn't actually that large, it's just insanely compact, to the point where it's amazing they managed to map out such a complicated level design. And this was the first dungeon in the game. Bravo, From Software. My silver medal goes to the Legacy dungeon that redeemed From Software fire levels in such a fantastic way that I don't think I can go back to places like the Iron Keep or Smouldering Lake or Lost Izalith ever again, because the Volcano Manor atop Mount Gelmir has spoiled me forever. From the moment you arrive, you're greeted by this dark, warm, hospitable house. Sure, there's a man trying to kill you with a pizza cutter upstairs, and the company is a little intense, but Raya's nice. Tanith seems like she genuinely likes you, and Patches is bearable for once. But after doing 2 missions for the manor, Raya mentions hearing things in the walls, and there's a ghost that tells you to slay Lord Rykard. It's crazy to me that one of From Software's best levels ever is hidden behind an illusory wall that many players will never find. But it just means if you face the Volcano Manor, you're a true gamer. Heading into the darkness, fighting your way through enemies, and emerging into the torture town of the manor is this moment of shock. The way this entire area is so well hidden as you climb Mount Gelmir, always obscured by convenient parts of the mountain to keep out prying eyes, top tier level design. The town is really fun to explore as you have multiple avenues. You can go along the rooftops to take out the long boys trying to snipe you, or you can take the normal road and deal with a virgin abductor and some doggos, but if you're unlucky you'll have to fall into the streets of the town and deal with an omen killer and more dogs. But I really like this little side street, reminds me of Central Yharnam, which, if you've seen my Bloodborne area rankings, top right corner, click the card, go check it out. Being reminiscent of Central Yharnam is a good thing. The workshop filled with Albinoric hostages is up next, the souls tortured beyond belief. The ones in the stocks hit surprisingly hard, but it's the ones that crawl along the ground that you have to worry about, because their grabs are brutal and can make a huge dent in your health bar. My favourite part of the Volcano Manor though is anything involving lava, as Elden Ring ditches the classic From Software lava damage in favour of a much more manageable experience. You can actually experiment with running across lava rivers or pools without needing to worry about equipping a fancy ring or something. It makes doing the little bits of platforming in the lower town quite fun, as you're not penalised for messing up a jump or two. All of this leads around to the Temple of Aegli, where you face off against the Godskin Noble, but shout out first things first goes to the shortcut bridge. It manages to tell a story of the Volcano Manor with nothing but visuals, as you see the cages strung up beneath, implying a gruesome method of execution. The second half of Volcano Manor as you climb up the cliffs towards the main building is also super fun. I really like the enemy selection here with the various snake soldiers, each with their own fun weapon types to make things more exciting. And I can even handle the virgin abductors. The optional area through the Stone Sword Key that loops back around to the lower manor is a nice end-off to the dungeon, as the other way leads to the way gate that takes you to Rykard. Maybe I'm just flawed that From Software finally developed a good lava level, but I think Volcano Manor ticks all of my boxes for a fun and well-designed level that also happens to be steeped in dark lore. Stormveil may be a better dungeon layout-wise, but it doesn't have the dark history of Volcano Manor, and that edges it out for me. Where else? Of course my favorite area in Elden Ring is the mind-blowing Leyndell Royal Capital. Hyped up as this location closest to the Erd Tree, your end goal for becoming the Elden Lord, there is so much anticipation built up for when you scale those walls and get your first look at the capital. So as you step out from the Grace and see the city before you, the ruined dragons splayed across its right side, the road stretching towards the Round Table Hold, while to your left the Erd Tree Sanctuary rests, it doesn't truly hit how impactful Leyndell is until you're down there exploring the city. Because if you can see it from that vantage point, you can go to it, and you can explore it. And there will be items and enemies and interesting things waiting for you at every corner. Back when I played Dark Souls 1 and made it to Anor Londo, I was floored by the location, but I wished I could explore the city, the area off the beaten path. We could see the buildings and locations, but we couldn't reach them. Leyndell makes that dream of mine a reality by letting me explore every street, every building, every side path, every alley. There is something to find everywhere. An ulcerated tree spirit in the lower burg of the city, secret passages leading to the sewers, one of which connects to my number 10 ranked area. It's when you realize though that you can climb the corpse of the dragon to get to higher ground and reach the battlements around the Round Table Hold though, that everything clicks. That is the special moment of Leyndell that never fails to make players think, damn, that was cool. From there, you can head up the routes to the Erd Tree Sanctuary with Godfrey's Shade and Morgott, as well as a Crucible Knight and the statue needed to progress Goldmask's questline. There's also a Colosseum where you can fight some overworld duelists, or you can head down to the Round Table Hold, which is one of my favorite gimmicks in FromSoft games. Exploring the abandoned Hunter's Workshop in Bloodborne, the untended graves in Dark Souls 3, and now the Leyndell Round Table Hold in Elden Ring, I live for that trope. Bonus point when you use the elevator past the Virgin Abductors and discover the area you may have been warped to from the Weeping Peninsula, you know, the one from the trap chest early in the game. There's so much to do. There's so much to find. There are legendary items to collect, like the Bolt of Gransax, which please collect it before the end game or you'll lose out on it forever. So it's even more striking when you come back after beating Farum Azula, and this entire city is covered in ash. The best legacy dungeon buried beneath the weight of your actions as you stumble your way over to the sanctuary to become Elden Lord. It's also just pretty. Great music. Love the Oracle Envoys at the start. No other location in Elden Ring floored me in quite the same manner, with such a spectacular sight. And for me, Leyndell Royal Capital may just be one of the best Soulsborne areas ever. But I'll confirm that in a future Soulsborne top 10 areas list. Wink wink, nudge nudge. And that is the Elden Ring areas ranked. I think everyone can agree I got the top 5 right, even if you'd switch them around placements wise. So which of the main legacy dungeons is your favourite? And do you have any fun stories from your first playthrough? Share them down below. Please be sure to parry that subscribe button for more gaming content every week. I'm still on vacation at the moment, but all of your support means the world. My socials are on screen now. Feel free to follow where you feel comfortable. I'd recommend my Twitter. A massive shout out to my patrons over on Patreon for supporting me for another month. You guys are amazing. And I'll see you guys next week. Adios.